Attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello and welcome to the Online ISP Forum for July 9th, 2013. Today's topic is Action Planning for Long-Term Goals within an Annual Planning Process. My name is Dan McCloy. I'm part of the team that provides supports throughout Oregon on person-centered practices and the 24-hour comprehensive ISP planning process. We're glad you're able to join us today. This webinar is being brought to you by the Oregon Technical Assistance Corporation. OTAC has been providing training and technical assistance to professionals and citizens concerned about intellectual and developmental disabilities since 1984. OTAC is available to answer 24-hour ISP process questions. If you have any questions or comments after today's forum, you can reach us at www.otac.org/ISP/support or at 503-428-5435. Participants in today's forum can submit questions through the chat box in the webinar console anytime during the presentation. We'll have time for a short question and answer session at the end of the presentation. This webinar is being recorded to share with others who weren't able to attend live today. Your telephones and microphones have been muted for this call. The recording of today's forum will be posted later today on the OTAC website. With us today is CJ Webb from the Individual Support Planning team here at OTAC. CJ has been providing services to people with disabilities for over 20 years. Currently, she does trainings for the 24-hour comprehensive ISP process, as well as person-centered thinking. She is a certified facilitator of person-centered plans, assisting teams with developing plans and supporting outcomes. So I thank you all for being with us, and I'm going to turn it over to CJ.
Welcome, everybody. Have a good afternoon. And I'm just going to start right in with the learning objectives for today. First, I do appreciate everybody being here in the afternoon. This isn't a typical time that we do this. I really want to let you guys know what we're going to focus on is to have information about long-term planning when that's needed. That how do you understand when long-term planning is needed, as well as some strategies to figure out how to plan with a person in the future. So one of the things is we're not going to talk about the action plan itself, but we're going to talk about what would go into an action plan. The first thing that I want to start with is to kind of find out a little bit who is in the audience to be able to make sure that I'm going to speak to everybody who, the types of services that you provide. So Dan has opened a poll, so if you could just quickly click on what service that you provide, residential, employment only, employment and ATE, or service coordinator, or none of the above.
We'll give you just another moment to complete that poll. Well, CJ, it looks like our results are in. We have 86% residential provider, 14% employment and or ATE provider.
Great. Thanks a lot. So one of the big things that I want to start with, there's some given assumptions that everyone that we know needs. Everyone needs support. And there are things that need to happen day to day, as well as month to month and those kinds of things. Also, there's an assumption that anytime you do long-term planning, for some people it's easier than others. So it's not kind of one size fits all when you're talking about long-range planning or long-term planning. The one big thing with long-range planning is that plans will change. And you need to make sure that that reevaluation of that plan happens regularly, because sometimes what you think may be at the end isn't exactly what was planned. One of the big things with long-term planning is that it will take time. And it will take coordination and planning. So you want to really make sure that those things happen when you're talking about long-range planning. I want to start off with something funny that I found, which our short-term solution is money and our long-term solution is more money. So this isn't necessarily a good way to look at the long-term planning that's out there. Of course, more money would always do more things. But I really want to show that when planning happens, that the better the things that can be in the future. So some long-term goals, and you probably have worked with people that have a variety of the ones listed, and a lot more things. So when someone wants a job, what changes in jobs, where do they want to travel? Do they want to travel within Oregon? Do they want to go outside of Oregon? Do they want to leave the United States? All of those things are long-term goals. They just take some time and some planning to get there. Other ones are also going to a vocational training program and learning the specific skills, such as if someone wanted to be an auto mechanic or something along those lines. And sometimes a long-term goal could be learning something, like learning to swim. So these are all different ideas, and there's tons more ideas that are out there to think about with long-term goals. So how do you know that somebody has something that is long-term, that you need to plan more than 1 year? So you're looking at things that are going to not be accomplished in the ISP period, because the ISP period is 1 year. So one of the things, I just pulled up question number 4 from the personal focus worksheet. This is one way you know what people might want to accomplish. The other way is sometimes just sitting down and talking with people. It may be about doing some activities, meeting somewhere and finding out. So the personal focus worksheet is a great place to capture, after you've had these conversations, about what really do people want to achieve in their future. So where to begin? And a lot of times people begin with looking at that personal focus worksheet. And so I've just given you an example from the John sample that we use. And he had hula, that he wants to go to Hawaii as often as possible. And the agenda question kind of lends itself to that piece of what steps need to be taken over this next ISP period to move towards these goals. That agenda question really also lends itself to say, what am I going to do this year? But it doesn't mean that whole goal is accomplished in this year. It may take more than a year. There are a lot of things in many people's lives that are going to be longer than 1 year. Another one to look at is John likes to work, and then he talks about helping office staff. This is one that, talking about where he wants to work, we're not really sure. And that agenda question kind of helps to say, what do we need to do this year to maybe look at that? And so it's looking at complete some job assessments. Look at those places that John might want to work. What some of the key things that John would want is that he has to have some social ability while he's at work. All of these things are going to be hard probably to accomplish in 1 year, because the agenda question also says he hasn't had many other job experiences than his current job in many years. So when those experiences are going to be very important to move forward. So this is something that I found, it's from the State Department, and it really lends itself to this idea of planning. And the foundation of planning, as this pyramid shows, is strength, talents, ethics, values, personality, and passions. These are the big pieces of that personal focus worksheet, getting to know who the person is before you can plan anything. Because if you don't know what the person wants and some of those factors that need to be taken into account to make it successful, it's going to be really hard to plan. And so that's the basis of that planning pyramid. The next part is then, once you know the person and all these different factors, then you go to long-term planning. And what does that look like? What what do you want to see in 2 years, maybe sometimes 3 years down the road? What is that going to be? Could it be a trip to Europe? And that intermediate, I look at that as maybe month to month, looking at what needs to happen, not necessarily every day, but throughout in order to meet that long term. And then there's going to be things that have to happen daily. And I'm going to go through some examples of those pieces of this planning pyramid. So one of the ways that a lot of times we look at it is we look at just the planning and we try to kind of lump it all together. We look at the day-to-day of needing to discuss maybe job options, then a plan, some various assessments over and do one every 2 months. And then what is that long-term goal? Making sure that he has a job in an office, assisting staff. But there may not be all of the specifics for that long-term goal. And most of the time, people are aware of that, but sometimes we get stuck because we don't change it. So really thinking about all of these things when you're planning, that it doesn't have that long-term goal might change as you find out that day-to-day and month-to-month information. So really taking that into account and realizing that that is part of planning, is making modifications to the ISP as needed. So one of the big things that I think is important to talk about is why are plans incomplete? So a lot of times I've heard that people say, oh, we didn't meet that goal. That there's always good reasons, but a lot of times it's poor planning. And so these are some of the tips that I'm going to give in just a minute around that, is to help with that planning, to really, how do you look at what you're planning for and make sure you're making the best informed decisions. So that's that other piece of insufficient information. Sometimes you don't have all the information while you're planning. And if you don't have all the information, make sure that you are making changes once you find out that information. And this is a huge one, and this is a hard one too, is begin with the end in mind. If we're kind of backtracking from this overarching larger goal that's going to be in 2 or 3 years, and then look at now what can be done this year, it's going to be more successful moving forward, and how you have to look at doing the planning. So when you're planning with the end in mind, I've given 2 different examples to look at. I looked at Jane, who wants a vacation to Italy in order to meet a lifelong goal. You probably know a lot of people who've talked about going places that sometimes look really, it's hard to see how it can happen. Someone doesn't have money. There's a lot of different factors that come into play, but it doesn't mean that you can't start planning. It may take longer. But look at what are you going to see at the end of that 2 years. And that's what you're going to see, is that she's going to go on that vacation to Italy. And that Jack has a job that he can work with animals in some capacity. That one's a little more vague because you're not exactly sure, but that's the end goal, is he wants to work with animals. You're not exactly sure about that job. So on this slide, it walks you through. So in that 1.5 years, you're going to purchase tickets and the necessary arrangements for lodging. That's not going to happen this ISP period. That's going to be later on. But it's something that you have to know what that's going to be. And you'll see where we're going with that in a second, of that planning for that purchase of that ticket and lodging arrangements. So in 6 to 9 months, that's when you can start researching those costs of what that's going to be. You know there's always a cost, and that's going to happen this year of starting to budget and move forward. But you don't need to look at the specific price until it gets a little closer, because you've already been saving. And these are just some ideas that I've come up with. So how their teams look at these exact long-term goals might be a little different. So for Jack, in a year and a half, you're going to secure that job, and based on his vocational themes. And between 6 and 9 months, so that's in this current ISP period, you're going to have, Jack is going to have a plan around what vocational themes you've come up with. So now let's get into that. A lot of times this is what the action plan focuses on, and this will be what the action plan needs to focus on this year. That previous slide you saw is going to probably be at the end of this year going into next year. The long-term goal is still the same on what you're going to do day to day and month to month. So day to day, she's going to need to have some support to get to work on time. Right now, she's not going to work on time, and if she doesn't go to work on time, she's making less money to be able to save for that trip to Italy. And so often, those are the connections, and that's that piece of that ISP for one person is really looking at that this vacation that she's going to be supported through residential needs to be supported through work as well. So that's that month to month is looking at how could she possibly increase her hours, since she has been working on Tuesdays and Thursdays a little bit more hours. And if that's unable because you can't make an employer increase your hours, then maybe she's going to find a job that she's going to work an additional afternoon a week. That's going to be able to look at the money that she's going to need to be able to go on that Italian vacation. So for Jack, this is where he wants to work with animals, but maybe you're not sure. You don't know what capacity that is. You don't know what kind of animals he likes, any of those things. So that day-to-day is you're going to do some discovery to really find out who is Jack. And residential is really included in any discovery process, because if you've heard me talk about discovery before, is it starts at home. Who is the person? And that's really the key to discovery. And that month to month, we'll be trying different environments and expose them to new ideas. So this first year really is going to be looking on that, the discovery and all of those pieces that are involved in there. You're not identifying any work at this moment for him, at least in this. And then the pieces that I already talked about, that 6 to 9 months and year and a half, that is that continuing planning going on. So with that end in mind and backtracking from there, you get to what you really need to do in this year to meet those long-term goals. So I found this very funny. So step number 2, then a miracle occurs. This is the big reason for planning. You don't know if that miracle is ever going to happen, and you really want to make sure that you're looking at what are all of those possibilities. And as a team come up with reviewing certain things, especially with those long-term goals. Because as I said earlier, it is going to change. And as you find out new information throughout this first year, it's going to possibly change what that long-term goal might be even. Oh, I had another one in here too. This one was a funny one. So to enhance leadership skills, and ascend the corporate ladder is his long-term goal, and short-term is a mocha latte. So I also hope that we get a little deeper than that. But again, how people look at long-term and short-term goals is very different, and what's going to help that person get up that corporate ladder, and a mocha latte for him seems to be the way. So I'm going to give you some better strategies than the mocha. The big thing is you want information about the person. Who is the person? Who is Jane? Who is Jack? Anybody. So often we're doing that through the personal focus worksheet. But sometimes we really do think annually what is going to happen. And so this is that, give yourself that opportunity to look in the future. And one of the big things is drilling down, or as I say, peeling the onion. It's asking the question behind the question. And I'm going to go a little bit more in detail about this in a minute. A really big thing that with strategy is that it takes time. When we talk about these questions, it will take time to observe people, to be able to ask them in ways that make sense for the person, and so realize that it's going to take time for these long-term goals to develop to be what it is. So you do have, when it is this long-range goal, there's that opportunity to continuously find out, continuously ask different questions. And also know that other people have information to help you figure these things out. So some of this was starting ways to start the conversation. So this is a way to look at what makes sense and doesn't make sense regarding who the person spends time with. So when people spend time with people, there's a key element in those relationships that can help to understand who the person is and maybe what long-term goals they might have if given that opportunity to think longer. So what are the person's interests and what works and doesn't work about those? You want to think about those preferred activities, and why is it a preferred activity? Is it a preferred activity because of the people that they're with? Or is it a preferred activity because of the time of day? Or is it the activity itself? All of these can lend itself to the information that you would need to say, what would a long-term goal be for this person? So somebody likes to watch, let's say up in Portland, they go to soccer timber games, and they go to a store and they buy a soccer ball. There's something, maybe you're figuring out that they have an interest in soccer. Maybe they don't play soccer, maybe they can't play soccer, but maybe they would like to go to a country or another place that has more soccer. Europe is a huge place for that. So thinking about all of those different options. Then also, how does the person just spend their day? And what works about that and what doesn't work? That's going to give you a lot of information, as well as how do you start talking with the person and other people in their life to think about what long-term goals are possible that they would like to have. Also, what makes sense or doesn't make sense regarding how they have fun. What do they do for fun? Who do they do that with? Also, if a person wants to learn something, how do they learn? All of these things will give you the information to be able to start moving forward with looking at a longer than an annual goal to accomplish something just this year. So it's building on this year and moving forward. So this gets into the questions and really looking at how do you peel the onion and how do you really drill down and find out what people mean and say by their words or their actions. Because sometimes people aren't going to be able to answer questions, so you're going to still think of what are the questions that you have and how are you going to observe that information to be able to gather it. And this pyramid really shows that, as we all know, the yes or no questions aren't very powerful. They give you a little bit of information, but they don't lend itself to really diving deep into what is it that they mean by that. Moving up the pyramid is those why questions are the most powerful. Sometimes those are hard questions for people to answer, and don't hesitate to try, but I'm also going to give you a little, some tips with the powerful questions. So when have you been most successful with a job? So this is me asking somebody else. And when was the last time you did your favorite activity? Oops, spelling error. Doing a delivery job. So that was when the person was most satisfied with their job. And when was the last time you did your favorite activity? Thursday. It doesn't really give you a ton of information, but it does give you a starting point. So what was it about the job that you found most satisfying? The person said, talking with lots of people. Now you're getting more rich information to figure out, they like doing delivery jobs, they like talking to people, and you may want to even drill down a little bit more, is why do they like talking to people? And they may come up with, I like always finding out where the person was born or where they've lived before, and that builds on, do they have an interest in going places or seeing all these different places that people have talked about with them? They might not have come up with that themselves, but that could be an option for somebody. So the last question on this slide, what is it about activities that you like the best? So that Thursday means that it's Arts and Crafts Day and they love making cards. Again, how do you then build on that? Asking them, what do you like? Why do you like making cards? And they say, I love, everyone who has a birthday, I make them a card and always have my whole life. Gives you a bunch of information. Would they want to go to a class on arts and crafts? Would they want to pursue something else or a job that includes those things? So here's some more options with some powerful questions. When have you had your most fun? Going to Disneyland. That gives you some information. When was the last time you went on vacation like that? Maybe 2009 to Crater Lake. What is it about that Disneyland trip that you found most satisfying? Warm weather. So with that, you're getting, they like Disneyland. They hesitated on that vacation that they had gone to Crater Lake, not really sure. Crater Lake is warm probably like 1 month a year. And then what was it about that warm weather? So I'm not going to go back to that Crater Lake, but going, what is it about that warm weather? They like to wear shorts and they have more fun when the weather is warm and they're able to be outside more. So when you're planning a long-term goal, for this person, it may be really looking at how do we plan something that might be in warmer weather at certain times of year, because maybe it's not always so much the activities, but the weather conditions. So these are all pieces of really asking and finding out more information to build on what those long-term goals could be. So I've had many people say different things like this to me. I want to go to Timbuktu because they heard about that. I want to be a lawyer. I want to be a surgeon. I want to drive. I want to be a millionaire. But it's not, those answers are all okay. It really is about asking more questions. So let's find out more questions. What does being a lawyer mean to you? When have you talked to a lawyer? What did you talk to that lawyer about? And building on all of that information, because so often it's not, and sometimes it is, sometimes it's not about being a lawyer. I supported a person and he talked about being a lawyer for a really long time. And when I kept asking different questions in different environments and finally got to it, he just wanted to tell people what to do. And he really felt that that's what lawyers did. So that's why he wanted to be a lawyer. And once he found out what it took to be a lawyer, and he could have gone to school if he really wanted to, but he found out how much schooling a lawyer took and decided that was not his choice. And we figured out what other jobs could he do that he could be in charge and tell other people what to do. So that's the direction that he went, rather than pursuing being a lawyer. Or it's not very nice to tell somebody, no, you'll never be a lawyer someday. Because there's usually something in what the person is saying that really is important to them. Has a person done research into that job or that trip? Have they looked into what it would take to go to Timbuktu? it's far away. It probably takes more than one plane to get there. You know, I don't know what lodging is like there. And so figuring out what is it that a person thinks about with Timbuktu. Is it just they saw it and heard it in a movie and thought it was a cool name? Or was it that they saw a movie and saw a beautiful island, paradise, and that's what they would like to see and go to? So Hawaii might be an option rather than Africa. When someone says they want to drive, what do they see themselves doing? Some people could very easily get a driver's license, and other people, it just isn't going to happen. And you don't want to kind of squash someone's dreams with that and find out why. So I worked with another guy, and he always talked about buying a big rig. That's what he always wanted. He was going to drive, and he was just going to be just like his brothers. And when I asked more questions and really found out what it was, is he missed talking with his brothers about those big rigs. And when you go to a car dealership that sells those big rigs, other people there like them too. And he stopped talking about driving and talked more about getting together with those people that talk about big rigs. And that was something that was really important to him. And how all of that comes about is by taking that time. This didn't happen in a week to find out that. It probably took a couple months of finding out and asking questions in a different way and in different environments. So if someone wants to be a millionaire, sometimes it only takes a couple dollars and have a person played lottery. I've had people who have said they want to be a millionaire, don't want to work, but also because of their religion don't gamble. So I'm not going to tell them they're not ever going to be a millionaire, because that's not for me to say. So again, what is it about being a millionaire that they see? And they might say, I own my own house. That's something that might be a lot more doable than somebody trying to win the lottery. But again, you don't know until you start asking more questions and figuring out what is behind what that question that they're posing. So it's really about figuring those things out about who the person is. And this is that piece that ends up why plans will need to change, because as you go through, people's answers are going to change. As people get information, and exposure to different things, that's going to change. So a couple things is that we do on our trainer resource on the OTAC web. We have other resources around action planning and the writing of those action plans. So I wasn't going to focus on that specific today unless a question comes up. But again, that desired outcome is that long-term goal, and then the steps that you're going to take are the things that you're going to be able to accomplish this year to meet it. And the only other piece I'd like to say about the action plan is it's also think about that issue. The issue is it's going to take more than a year for this desired outcome to happen. And that is an okay issue, because there are many things in people's lives that are going to take a lot longer. The learningcommunity.us, that has information about asking questions. It does have the article about the powerful questions, that triangle that I showed. And then the state.gov, this link is the link to that pyramid that has other tools to help with planning. Before we get to questions, I wanted to let you know about upcoming trainings. So there is 4 two-day ISP trainings and half-day how to train direct support on an individual's ISP. So in 2013, we have put together where the 2-day ISP is followed by a half a day, and you can sign up for the 2.5 days. But if you've already had just the ISP process overview and you haven't had the half day, you also can sign up just for the half day. Also, there is an employment-focused class. However, I always encourage residential to come to any employment-focused class because, as I said, with discovery and other pieces, it does start at home, and there needs to be that connection between home and work to help people have that full life. And so Tools to Find the Right Job is in Roseburg in August, and that class talks about different ways to get to know people and some tools to move forward with helping people have a job that they would prefer. Dan, are there any questions?
As of the moment, there are no questions. Everyone, this is your opportunity to ask questions. I remind you that your lines are muted, so you will need to type your questions into the chat box. So we can give you just a minute, anything that is on your mind that you would like to ask CJ. Dan wants to know if you can get a copy of this, and CJ, I can answer that. In the follow-up email, you will be receiving a link to download a copy of CJ's presentation today.
Well, if there are no questions, that is the information that I had for you today. And there will be 2 additional questions about the presentation today.
Okay, we'll move on to the next poll here. Just wanted to know how clear and easy was it to understand the presenter today?
And while you're answering those poll questions, our next webinar will be at our kind of more typical time of 10 a.m. on Thursday, August 11th, and it's going to be about ISP teams and addressing hard issues, the tools to make the conversation productive.
And overall, how satisfied are you guys with the forum today? All right. Well, thanks everyone. Just a quick reminder, this webinar has been recorded and we will post it online by tomorrow at www.otac.org/ISP/forum for you to watch and share with others. So on behalf of the ISP and Person Center Practices team at OTAC, I want to say thank you and have a great rest of your day. Goodbye, everybody.